بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، أحمده وأستعينه وأؤمن به وأتوكل عليه، ثم أصلي وأسلم على خاتم أنبيائه وأفضل سفرائه المحمود الأحمد المصطفى الأمجد أبي القاسم محمد، وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا، سيما بقية الله في أرضه وحجته على عباده المهدي المنتظر فداه أرواح العالمين. قال الله العظيم في محكم كتابه الكريم: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم، والله أخرجكم من بطون أمهاتكم لا تعلمون شيئا وجعل لكم السمع والأبصار والأفئدة لعلكم تشكرون. آمنا بالله، صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. What is the reasoning and the purpose of the ahkam? Why is music haram? Why is hijab an obligation upon mature women in Islam? Why is this? Why is that? Before I begin to talk about the purposes and the reasoning behind some of the ahkam, first I would like to start with a short introduction into Shi'i beliefs. There is an age-old disagreement between two groups of people since the inception of the science of theology in Islam. One group is called Al-Asha'ira, and it's made up of mainly Sunni Muslims. Their belief is that saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not and does not oppress His creation is a sort of limitation on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. God is omnipotent. He is the creator of all things. Therefore, He has the right to do anything that He wills to His creation. He can subject them to anything, whatever He likes. The other group, which are referred to as Al-Adliya, which are made up of another school of thought within Sunni Islam known as Al-Mu'tazila and the Shia, they say, and this whole argument boils down to one single point. They say that when it comes to specific things, These things have intrinsic qualities. So for example, the example that I mentioned last night, beating an orphan child is an abhorrent act. It's an evil act. You don't need to be Muslim or to read the Quran or to read the Hadith to realize this. This is an evil act in the eyes of any human being, anybody who is not a psychopath. And there are good acts that are also seen as good by all human beings. Everybody agrees that respecting and showing kindness to your parents is a good act. You don't need to read the Quran to understand this. This is an intrinsic quality within this act. Now, this means that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prohibits us from doing something, He is not playing around, God forbid. The Asha'ira say that God can do whatever He likes. If He likes to make something good, haram, then it's His choice. If He likes to make something haram or ugly, an obligation, then it's also His choice. This is not correct. We believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made obligatory acts obligatory upon us because they possess a positive quality. He has made things haram upon us because of their negative aspects. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْخَمْرِ وَالْمَيْسِرِ قُلْ فِيهِمَا إِثْمٌ كَبِيرٌ وَمَنَافِعُ لِلنَّاسِ. They ask you about gambling and wine. Say that there is great sin and benefit for human beings. وَإِثْمُهُمَا أَكْبَرُ مِن نَفْعِهِمَا. The evil within alcohol and gambling is far greater than any benefit that they may possess. And so we believe as Shia Muslims that if God orders us and commands us to do something, then it's because this act is good and benevolent. And if He tells us to stay away from something, it's because this act is abhorrent and evil in its essence. And so, to summarize, there is reasoning behind all acts in Islam. There is no single act that doesn't have any sort of wisdom or reasoning behind it. This is a given in the school of thought of the Ahlul Bayt. Now, the question is, do we have access to the reasoning or not? There are three answers to this question. All three of them are correct, because each one of them applies to one part or section of this question. The first is, yes, we do have access to the wisdom and reasoning and the purpose of some of the ahkam. This isn't some new inception of an idea, the reasoning behind the ahkam. This is something that our ulama have always been concerned about. And so one of our greatest ulama, and we are in the presence of ulama, one of our greatest ulama, Al-Shaykh Mohammad ibn Ali ibn Babuwayh al-Qummi, also known as Al-Shaykh al-Saduq, he is possibly the most important scholar in the area of Shi'i hadith. He has compiled 300 books of ahadith. Unfortunately, we only have access to about 10 of them today. One of the interesting things or attributes about Shaykh al-Saduq and the ulama of that era is that they weren't creative when it came to titling their books. So the titles of his books are self-explanatory. So he has a book by the name of Thawabul A'mal, the rewards of acts. عقاب الأعمال, the punishment of acts. عيون أخبار الرضا, the most beautiful hadiths of Imam al-Rida. Another one is Kitab al-Khisal, the book of attributes. And generally, the topics are consistent with the title of the book. Another book of Shaykh al-Saduq is Kitabu man la yahdaruhu al-faqih, the book for the one that doesn't have access to a jurist. So his books, the titles were self-explanatory. He has a book by the name of Ilal al-Shara'i', the purpose and reasoning behind legislation. Of course, he's talking about religious legislation. And so our ulama have always understood this concern that people had. Is there reasoning behind the ahkam? Yes, of course. Which is why he wrote this book. And it contains 1,907 hadiths from the Imams alayhimus salam that teach us about the reasoning behind some of these ahkam. Now, some of these reasonings are actual reasoning behind the hukm or behind the ruling. Some of them are wisdom. In other words, maybe it's not the actual reason because either the person who wrote down the hadith couldn't understand or we lack the capacity to understand the reasoning. Either way, he has written this book. Before Shaykh al-Saduq, one of our ulama, his name was Al-Fadl ibn Shadhan. He was a alim at the time of Imam al-Askari, Imam al-Hadi. He says in a lengthy hadith, it's a single hadith that's about 20 pages long. He would ask the Imam al-Rida alayhi salam, about the reasoning behind some of the ahkam. سألته عن علة كذا عن علة كذا. One of the things that they would ask the Imams about was the reasoning behind prayer. Why do we have to pray? This isn't, again, some new question. People are busy these days, they can't pray. They would ask the Imams alayhimus salam the same question. Someone comes to the Imam, either Imam al-Sadiq or Imam al-Baqir, and he says to him, why do we have to pray? Why do people have to pray? Because people are busy. They can't take time off of work, either Salat al-Fajr and ruin their sleep cycle, or Salat al-Dhuhr when they're at the office or behind the wheel. The Imam answers his question. He says that if people were left without ever being reminded of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His blessings, and remembering the Prophet Muhammad, then they would become like all other religions. You look at these religions that are currently, they have followers. For example, a Catholic, you see these people doing everything they want to do. They're not bound by anything, and yet every week they go to the church and they ask God for forgiveness. So their religion isn't compatible with their lifestyle. Whereas for us, you do things, then you remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If, God forbid, you commit a sin, then you remember God. You ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness. And so they would ask these questions from the Imams back then. It's not some new concept. So, Al-Fadl ibn Shadhan has this lengthy hadith, it's about 20 pages, it's contested, but from what I understand, it is a hadith from Imam al-Rida. So the person who is narrating the hadith asks him, he says, is this something that you concocted? Are these your words? He says, no, how could they be my words? How would I know what the reasoning behind of the ahkam are? These are things that I have heard from Imam al-Rida. I have compiled them into a single hadith. Anyway, so some of the reasoning behind some of the ahkam are there. All you have to do is find them. So that's answer number one. And I feel that some people know the reasoning behind the ahkam, but they can't be convinced. And this is an issue that you would need to fix yourself. The imams can't fix this. When it comes to things like hijab, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very clear in the Quran. He says, ذَلِكَ, when He talks about the hijab, He says, ذَلِكَ أَدْنَى أَن يُعْرَفْنَ فَلَا يُؤْذَيْنَ. The reason why you have to wear hijab is because that way you will not be subjected to abuse. Right here in the United Kingdom, 50% of all women are subjected to some sort of abuse throughout their lives. From the extreme occurrence of things like rape, wal-'ayadu billah, to other types of harassment. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that if you wear a full hijab, don't bring me statistics that say that in Muslim countries abuse happens this often. Why? Because these statistics don't mention how the women were dressed. And so Allah is clearly saying that if you wear a hijab, a full hijab, then you will not be subjected to abuse. They will not hurt you. Now, I'm not throwing the blame on women. I'm not victimizing the abusers, God forbid. But Allah is saying that if you wear a full hijab, not a hijab with makeup, not a hijab with jeggings, not a hijab with all these articles of clothing, but a full hijab, then you will not be subjected to abuse. And you see this. If you imagine a woman that is fully clothed in a full hijab, abaya, niqab, pushiya, whatever it may be. And then imagine someone that's wearing immodest clothes. Which one is more at risk of abuse? The one in full hijab or the other one? It's kind of obvious to me. I don't know if it is to you, but it's sort of obvious to me. Anyway, so the ahkam are mentioned. All we have to do is find them in their sources. So that's answer number one. Answer number two, sometimes the ahkam had a valid reason at the time of their inception, but maybe the reasoning goes, but the hukm will remain. I'll give you an example. In Turkey, not the animal Turkey, but the country Turkey, the animation or the cartoon of Pokemon is banned. Why? Because in the year 2000, imagine this, so 23 years ago, 2 children were watching Pokemon, and for some reason they thought they also had superpowers. They went on the balcony of their apartment and they threw themselves off of the balcony, which ended in the death of these 2 children. And so the Turkish government decided to ban Pokemon up until today, even though the games and the cartoons that are available at the fingertips of children are far more dangerous today. But it will not change the rule. The rule remains the rule. No one questions the law. And so when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala issues a new legislation, a new law, then He acknowledges all human beings from the time of its inception, so the inception of the law, up until the last person dies on earth. Why? Because the law has to be absolute and general. If you go to a police officer and you ask them, you say, why do you have such big fines for people that exceed the speed limit by, say, 50 miles? And then you would question them and tell them that you have a Tesla, and your Tesla has a LiDAR, a radar, emergency braking, it's got this, that, and I'm sure I will be fully aware, and I'll go in the dark hours of the night where it will be, the freeway would be open, I won't have a lot of cars in front of me, can I go past the speed limit? He will say no. Because the law needs to be absolute. It needs to be general. The law cannot be specified to specific individuals. That's not how the law works. And so when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala issues a command, or when the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa issues a command, it needs to be general. It needs to be absolute, because that's how the law works. And we have examples like this within Shi'i fiqh. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa in his time, he said to the women that in Salatul Mayyit, so the prayer that they pray over the deceased, the women need to go towards the back. It's mustahab for them to do so. And the women and the men can come to the front. So he said to them that the further back you go, the more thawab you will gain. Al-Shaykh al-Saduq, he mentions a hadith that explains this hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so he says that back then the women and men would mix. And so Rasulullah made it a law. But he also gave it a religious twist. So he made it mustahab upon the women to go as far back as possible, and for the men to come as close to the front as possible. This became the law. The Imam alayhi salam says, بَقِيَ الْفَضْلِ. It's still mustahab even if there's no reasoning behind it, because this is how the law works. Finally, and this is the final answer, which is also truthful, is that we have an issue, and it's kind of a philosophical / psychological issue within ourselves. And that is that we do not have faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if you are a Muslim, naturally you would believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You believe in the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alihi. You believe in the Quran. You believe in the Imams. The way that you're supposed to act is have complete faith in Rasulullah. Have complete faith in Allah. One of the companions of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, by the name of Jabir ibn Yazid al-Ju'fi, he was a very close companion of Imam al-Baqir. He once said to the Imam that if you take a pomegranate from the tree and you split it in half, maybe you've heard the hadith, and you tell me that one half of the same pomegranate is halal, but the other one is haram, then I will not contest you. I will fully agree with you. Why? Because when you have individuals like the infallible Imams, when you're dealing with the Quran, when we're talking about Rasulullah Muhammad, then it's a totally different ball game. You have to have faith in Rasulullah. You have to have faith in the Quran. Yes, the reasoning might not be obvious to you, but who cares? Because you have faith. Imagine if, God forbid, you had a physiological problem, say blinding pain in your pancreas. You go to the doctor says that we need to diagnose the issue. He tells you to go and do a MRI, CT scan, all of these different things. Sometimes the diagnosis takes a long time. But imagine if the diagnosis takes a year long. Towards the end of the year, the doctor will tell you that you have so-and-so problem, which you need to address. You won't contest this. You'll say, okay, can you find me a good doctor? Where do I go? What do I do? Why? Not because you have blind faith in the doctor, but because you understand the process. The doctor is someone that has put a lot of effort into his education. He's done everything that he can do, and he has told you that you have this problem and you have to get it fixed. This is our situation with Islam. You follow the word of Amirul Mu'mineen salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, because Amirul Mu'mineen knows what he's talking about. You don't contest what Amirul Mu'mineen says. If Imam al-Sadiq says that so-and-so is haram, khalas, that's it. I remember a few years ago, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, we were sitting with a scholar. He was a young scholar, and we were talking and debating about food and their ingredients, and I told him, you know, the Wonka nerds, I don't know if you have them in England, they're available in other places. I told him that Wonka nerds is questionable because it has the ingredient E120 or cochineal, carmine, the insect. Because to use natural coloring, they take them from a specific insect. So I told him that they're taking the color from this insect. And his reaction was very interesting to me. Immediately, we were sitting in Mashhad, his wife was overseas. He took his phone and he immediately started to record a voice note. He said, remember Wonka nerds, don't buy them anymore. I don't want you to eat them. My kids shouldn't eat them. This is how we're supposed to be. You hear something is haram, khalas. Because you have trust in the process, because you have trust in the ulama, because you have trust in the Quran. And so whatever the Quran is saying, you accept it. Now, it doesn't mean that there's no reasoning, as I said. But if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the reasoning, then that's great. But if He doesn't, then He isn't forced to do so. And this is what we refer to as ruhul ubudiyyah, the spirit of obedience. Because at the end of the day, what is Islam? Amirul Mu'mineen salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi says, he says, لَأَنْسِبَنَّ الْإِسْلَامَ نِسْبَةً, I will give a name or a definition of Islam that no one has ever used. He says, Islam in its essence is what? It's obedience. Al-Islamu huwa at-taslim. That's the whole idea behind Islam. So if you call yourself a Muslim, then you have to accept Islam. Now, I'm not saying that you should accept anything that a Muslim says as the gospel truth. Obviously, I'm not. But if you find that there is something mentioned either by our grand ulama, or mentioned in the Quran, or mentioned in the reliable books of hadith, then that's it. You take their word for it. This is true Islam. Now, just before they arrive into Karbala, Al-Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salam is going towards the city on his horse. And he says, the narrator says, that the Imam alayhi salam slept for just a minute. Then he got up and he started to say this, Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. The narrator says that he either said this twice or 3 times. Suddenly, Ali ibn al-Hussein, Ali al-Akbar noticed. He said, Ya Abah, la araka Allahu makruha. What happened? What's going on? The Imam said that I slept for a minute and I saw somebody on a horse come towards me, and he was saying, Al-qawmu yasirun wal-manaya tasiru ma'ahum. These people, this group of people are traveling, and behind them closely are their deaths following them. Now listen to this. What does Ali al-Akbar say? He says, Ya Abah, awalasna ala al-haq. Are we not on the truth? Do we not believe in the truth? Imam al-Hussein says, yes. وَالَّذِي إِلَيْهِ مَرْجِعُ الْعِبَادِ. Yes, by God, we do follow the truth. What does Ali al-Akbar say? He says, then we don't care. إِذَنْ لَا نُبَالِي إِن كُنَّا مُحِقِّينَ. We don't care about death as long as we are on the true path. Which is why Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam says in the beautiful dua of the day of Arafah, he says, Allahumma inni as'aluka hajati. I ask you for that one wish, التي إن أعطيتنيها لم يضرني ما منعتني. I ask you for that one wish, which if you gave me that wish, then anything that you don't give me doesn't matter to me. And I ask you for that one wish, which if you gave me anything else, it wouldn't be of any benefit to me. فَكَاكَ رَقَبَتِي مِنَ النَّارِ. You ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to spare you from the punishment of hell. And so when you find the truth, khalas, you don't care. There's nothing beyond the truth. On the day of Ashura, Al-Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salam is standing in the battlefield after all of his companions had been killed. Suddenly, Ali al-Akbar comes out. And he says to the Imam, will you give me permission to go out to the battlefield? In historic books, there's a very detailed description of the feelings that the Imam alayhi salam went through. First, the Imam says that you have my permission. Then it says that the Imam looked at him, نَظَرَ آيِسٍ مِّنْ. The Imam looked at him in complete despair. The Imam knew that if Ali al-Akbar goes out, then he will not return. He goes out and he starts to read these verses of poetry. أنا علي بن الحسين بن علي نحن وبيت الله أولى بالنبي أضربكم بالسيف أحمي عن أبي ضرب غلام هاشمي علوي تالله لا يحكم فينا ابن الدعي. He goes out into the battlefield, he fights like a warrior, he kills a number of the enemy combatants. Then he comes back to the tent. When he comes, he says, يا أبا إن ثقل الحديد إن العطش قد قتلني وثقل الحديد قد أجهدني. I am dying from thirst, O Father. I cannot hold all of this metal on top of me. فهل لي إلى شربة من الماء من سبيل. أويلي من تلاقوا عند الوداع مشابق طول لمن هو وللقايع لاعبنا لبيه والابو لا على وليده يا ويلي وداعي لك شر يشم حسين خدبنا يحبه ودمعه مثل دمع ابنه يصبه النار اللي بقلب ابنه بقلبه يخفيها على ابنه والنوب تظهر يخفيها على ابنه والنوب تظهر. Then the Imam said, بني عد بارك الله بك. Go back to the battlefield. فسرعان ما يسقيك جدك من كأسه الأوفى شربة لا تظمأ بعدها أبدا. For the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam will give you a glass of water after which you will never be thirsty. He goes out into the battlefield reciting the same verses of poetry. At this point, Hamid ibn Muslim says that I was standing and next to me was a man by the name of Murrat ibn Munqidh. He said to me, عَلَيَّ آثَامُ الْعَرَبِ إِن لَمْ أُثْكِلْ أَبَاهُ بِهِ. May I be a person that is responsible for all the transgressions of all the Arabs if I did not make his father Hussein cry over him. He goes into the battlefield, أَجَرَكُمُ اللَّهُ فَطَعَنَهُ فسقط على فرسه وأخذه الفرس إلى الأعداء فقطعوه إربا إربا. قال يا أبا عليك مني السلام، هذا جدي رسول الله سقاني بكأسه الأوفى، وهو يقول يا حسين إن لك كأسا مذخورا. Imam al-Hussein came to him. He said, Ya Ali, ala dunya ba'daka al-afa. He said, I don't want to live in this world anymore without you. الله يساعد حسين أبو اليمية يشوف أمطاي يا بر وسابح بدمه، ما كان من الطعن سالم بجسمه يشيم، ما لقى كبد الزكية يناديه وليس به حراك، بني اليوم فارقنا الرسول. اللهم إنا نسألك وندعوك بأحب الخلق إليك بمحمد وآل محمد. سيدنا الجليل تفضلون. أن تصلي على محمد وآل محمد، وأن تعجل في فرج مولانا صاحب الزمان، به اغفر ذنوبنا واستر عيوبنا، اقض حوائجنا، اشف أمراضنا ومرضانا، وبه ارحم اللهم موتانا، وإلى أرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات والشهداء والصالحين والعلماء، بالأخص آية الله العظمى السيدة بالقاسم الخوي، نهدي لهم ثواب الفاتحة قبلها الصلوات.